Good morning and most welcome to 1415 of the Heidegger series. And we will continue with Maurice Merleau-Ponty's lovely little booklet, The World of Perception. And I will continue where I left off in 1414, page 99, in the middle with a sentence beginning with then. And we have been talking about art and the temporal progression of movies, movement, and how getting a clear idea of it rids the movement of its energy, its direction. Then, as now, this viewer will be left not with a store of recipes, but a radiant image, a particular rhythm. Then as now, the way we experience works of cinema will be through perception. Music offers too straightforward an example, and for this reason we shall not dwell on it for long here. It is quite clearly impossible in this case to make out that the work of art refers to anything other than itself. Programmatic music, which describes a storm or even an occasion of sadness, is the exception. Here we are unquestionably in the presence of an art form that does not speak. And yet, a piece of music comes very close to being no more than a medley of sound sensations. From among these sounds, we discerned the appearance of a phrase, and as phrase follows phrase, a whole, and finally, as Proust put it, a world. This world exists in the universe of possible music. Whether in the district of Debussy or the kingdom of Bach, all I have to do here is listen without soul searching. Ignoring my memories and feelings. And indeed, the composer of the work, to listen just as perception. Looks at the things themselves without bringing my dreams into the picture. My comment here is that this is extraordinary close to the autobiography, the voice of a friend. That open listening without defining, etiquetting, or, so to speak, make clear. Finally, something similar may be said of literature. Even though the analogy has often been disputed because literature uses words which also serve to designate natural objects. Many years have already elapsed since Mallarmé made a distinction between the poetic use of language and everyday chatter. chatterer only names things sufficiently to point them out quickly to indicate what he is talking about. This is alarmingly good. I'll repeat it. The chatterer only names things sufficiently to point them out quickly to indicate what he is talking about. Empty concepts, shallow speech. The poet, by contrast, according to Mallarmé, replaces the usual way of referring to things, which presents them as well known. With a mode of expression that describes the essential structure of the thing and accordingly forces us to enter into that thing. I'm just going to put my coat on. To speak of the world poetically is almost to remain silent. If speech is understood in everyday terms, and Mallarmé wrote notoriously little, yet in the little he left us, we at least find the most acute sense of poetry, which is carried entirely by language and which refers neither directly to the world as such, nor to prosaic truth, nor to reason. This is consequently poetry as a creation of language, one which cannot be fully translated into ideas. It is because poetry's first function, as Henri Bremont and Paul Valéry would later remark, it is not to designate ideas, to signify. That Mallarmé and subsequently Valéry always refused either to endorse or reject. Prosaic commentaries on their poems. In the poem, as in the perceived object, form cannot be separated from content. What is being presented cannot be separated from the way in which it presents itself to the gaze. And some of today's authors, such as Maurice Blanchot, have been asking themselves whether what Mallarmé said of poetry should not be extended to the novel and literature in general. A successful novel would thus consist not in a succession of ideas or theses, but would have the same kind of existence as an object of the senses or a thing in motion. Which must be perceived in its temporal progression by embracing its particular rhythm, and which leaves in the memory not a set of ideas, but rather the emblem and the monogram of those ideas. There is once more a reference to rhythm, and that the rhythm does not leave in memory a set of ideas, but an emblem and the monogram of those ideas. It leaves a moving trace, not a stopping, static idea or understanding. If these observations are correct, and if we have succeeded in showing that a work of art is something we perceive, the philosophy of perception is thereby freed at a stroke from certain misunderstandings that might be held against it as objections. The world of perception.
Nej,
Du kan
Du
trycka
måste
på.
stänga.
Ja, ge mig bara ett ögonblick här. Du kan sätta paus.
okej. Vi gillar faktiskt det här.
Sorry for the stopping there. We had somebody coming round, closing the window. The world of perception consists not just of all natural objects, but also of paintings, pieces of music, books, and all that the Germans call the world of culture. Far from having narrowed our horizons by immersing ourselves in the world of perception, far from being limited to water and stone, we have rediscovered a way of looking at works of art, language, and culture which respects their autonomy and their original richness. It's indeed a very small booklet. I'm already at lecture 7, the final one. Classical world, modern world. In this, the last lecture, I would like to assess the development of modern thought as I have characterized it, more or less well, in the preceding ones. Could the return to the world of perception which we have observed in the work of painters and writers alike, as well as that of certain philosophers and the pioneers of modern physics. When compared with the ambitions of classical science, art and philosophy, be seen as evidence of decline. On the one hand, we have the self-assurance of a system of thought which is unfailingly convinced of its mission, both to know nature through and through, and to purge its knowledge of man of all mysteries. In modernity, on the other hand, this rational universe, which is open in principle to human endeavors to know it and act within it, is replaced by a kind of knowledge and art that is characterized by difficulty and reserve, one full of restrictions. In modernity, we have a representation of the world which excludes neither fissures nor lacunae. A form of action which is unsure of itself, or, at any rate, no longer blithely assumes it, can obtain universal assent. We must indeed acknowledge that in the modern world we lack the dogmatism and self-assurance of the classical worldview, whether in art, knowledge, or action. Modern thought displays the dual characteristics of being unfinished and ambiguous. This allows us, should we be so inclined, to speak of decline and decadence. we think of all scientific work as provisional and approximate, whereas Descartes believed he could deduce once and for all time the laws governing the collision of bodies from the divine attributes. Museums are full of works to which it seems that nothing could be added. Whereas our painters display works to the public which sometimes seem to be no more than preparatory sketches. And these are the very works that get subjected to interminable analysis, because their meaning is not univocal. My comment there, it speaks in many voices. So what is pointed to here is what I would call the open perception. What Merleau-Ponty calls emblem. Instead of catching art or music or the world as a thing of perception, and openness can inhabit much more of both what's out there and what's in there. It's a certain narrowing of understanding that is both on the side of the viewer and what is being viewed. It reminds me about what the American neurologist David Bardard discovered. Inside our brain there is a rhythm maker. It is called the cerebellum. And previously it was thought that the prefrontal cortex and the grey areas around the head were storage points for defined ideas of reality and their relations. That does not seem to be the case. Rather, it is a moving thing, an actual movement within the brain initiated by the cerebellum. And in the movement is understanding or learning, doing. They look like beautiful flashes when they are harmonious. And when the cerebellum, like a conductor of a concert, is well trained, the patterns that flashes quickly through the brain are complex, stable, and they also make do for a permanence that is not possible within the old model. I would say there is a sort of constancy. An emblem is more constant than the concept of an idea. The ideas seem shallow, momentary, and automatic, not well directed. When I saw those depictions from a functional magnetic resonance imaging, it to my eyes looked like a depiction of music, as far as you can depict music. Astonishing patterns. And not fixed. Energetic and also directed. You could see when this emblem, as Merleau-Ponty calls it, is turned into an idea or empty concept. The rhythm gets uneasy, forced, and not directed. It is spreading out. It does not have the shape of a clear understanding in the way I would call expanded understanding, that both take in the outer and the inner, the two realms. That are constantly reinforcing each other or sort of being contradictory to each other. As I showed in the previous lecture, it seems when they are more at odds with each other, there will be a certain change in the brain imaging. doesn't look as healthy. And there you have the whole scale going to a diseased understanding. And it's a bit like everything is against each other, or the directions go in different omnidirectional way, not as wholesome and artistic. Oddly enough, these patterns are at their very best when someone is really appreciating art, as looking at why not a painting of Cézanne, but doing it calmly and with this embodied understanding that you get in a balanced state. So maybe a comment from my dear colleague Kalle. There you go.
I find a little bit problematic the use of the word emblem.
Yeah.
So Merleau-Ponty prefers the word emblem instead of set of ideas. But does he really resolve anything by using the word emblem? Emblem is usually defined as a concept, like standing for a virtue. For instance, a shell can be a symbol of James the Great. It's the pilgrim's attributes, and that's one example of an emblem. I've also thinking about the coat of arms of Lisbon, which is more elaborate, but I don't know if you would call it an emblem. So I don't know if substituting the concept or ideas to emblem resolves anything, and I don't really know what he means really with the word emblem. What's your take on that? What do we really resolve? It's not really renaming things. What is an emblem for you?
Well, my take on it, as I understand it, emblem is more in the region of a picture, or picture, an image. And as we usually say, that an image tells more than 1,000 words. It is, I wouldn't say it's art-like, but it is more telling than verbal concepts. For instance, the lovely shield of Niels Bohr is containing many different features, and a lot of them are in language contradictory. Or why not choose my emblematic, if you like? Yeah, I do agree, it can give odd associations, emblem. But the emblem or picture or image of the Necke cube, which is inherently polysematic, and to help the understanding, think about the concepts as being, or as he used idea here, maybe not the most fortunate word, but think of them as being possibly monosemic, having one meaning, like in, well, we can use the expression impressionist. Rather fitting here, since Cézanne was, well, post-impressionist. So do the comparison. I go to the art gallery and rather swiftly I look at the Cézanne painting of absolute beauty and I just say, that is post-impressionist. That is more, as I think, Merleau-Ponty means by an idea. But whereas, as in the example I mentioned, the voice of the friend, I do not put the etiquette. I don't even say it's my friend, it's telling by itself. It's more open, polysemic, many voices, like a concert. Polyphonous, I think the term is, many tunes. You have the violins, you have the drums, you have the cello, the piano if you're lucky, I love the piano, and then you have a solo. And it's very hard to say, you just got the piano. And if I say it's just a piano, it's a bit like saying, that's Cézanne, it's a post-impressionist, and that's it. Yep.
And I thought about the etymology of emblem. It comes from the Greek embalein, to throw in, And we have learned from Rosen, but also from Heidegger, of course, to go to the etymology. And Rosen, he makes very cleverly, he makes at least in one case, he makes an active interpretation. It was archetypes. So he goes to he takes the active meaning or archetype. Type comes from type hit. So it becomes something active. So here, embody, throw in. So it becomes not only a passive emblem, like a passive noun, but something that you work on. So like an archetype actually, perhaps emblem. So we should do as Rosen does, gives an active meaning to words, and not only concepts. Images, yes. If we say that emblem is like an image, that's better, because image can say 1,000 things, as the old cliché goes, and it's better than words. And words are visual. Even the shell, the symbol of James the Great, can stand for many things. Immortality, probably, pilgrimage, the sea, and so forth. Aphrodite, also. Scallop is the symbol of Aphrodite. So image is more evocative. So you cannot say in one what is a shell or shell. The symbol. So yes, and then okay, like a piece of music also. Okay, I leave back to you.
No, it's good so, but could you please just write the name David Barder?
Yes, indeed. Can I put it here? Can you? So let me see if I can.
Down there, please.
His last name is spelled like this. Pader.
Yes.
So you pronounce it Pader.
Actually, this is one of the few
But,
surnames
but,
I don't know how to pronounce it. But it's probably coming from the German Bader, but I don't know. Put a little pause here. Let's zoom in on the name Bader. I will now continue with the lecture, and I would add something from my own hobby area. I'm an amateur painter, and this is my take on Merleau-Ponty, and it has to do with not paintings as such, but the very act of painting. And there is a very specific view of how to paint, which could be called Cézanne style. Cézanne does not use, as previous Impressionist, color to depict space and form, but they are integral. So Cézanne himself is very true to the idea of image or emblem or something holistic. But this painting style, which is not Cézanne's own, tried to make a division between what could be called mechanical technique, the act of putting color on the palette, the mixing situation, how to hold the brush, traditional understanding and knowledge. They have been put against each other in this modernistic painting philosophy. So the technique is merely simple doings, repetitive or non-informed by the essence of true creativity. So they make a disjunction here. And you can see the same trend as we mentioned before, the inside and the outside. What is mind and what is body. Things that occur many times in the little booklet. And here is a similar thing. And it's a bit odd, it often gets the Cézanne style name because Cézanne was incredibly meticulous with his technique. And he saw them as integral into what he was doing. He didn't make a difference. So true creativity is different, of course, on technique, but they go hand in hand. They are the same thing or like each other. It goes for Picasso as well, it goes for Dali, it goes for many painters. They are incredibly meticulous with their techniques. Dali planned all his paintings ahead. Everything was planned. And according to this school, that would make creativity impossible. But planning and creativity can obviously, in the case of Dali and Picasso, go hand in hand. I will now continue with the book. the last leg. Look at the number of studies of Rimbaud's silence after publishing the one and only book that he personally was to offer to his contemporaries. By contrast, how few problems seem to arise from Racine's silence after theatre. It seems as though today's artists seek to add to the enigmas which already surround them, to send yet more sparks flying. Even in the case of an author such as Proust, who in many respects is as clear as his classical predecessors. The world he describes for us is neither complete nor univocal. In Andromaque, we know that Hermione loves Pyrrhus, and at the very moment when she sends Oreste to kill him, no member of the audience is left in any doubt. The ambiguity of love and hate which makes the lover prefer to lose the one she loves rather than to leave him to another. Is not fundamental. For it is quite clear that if Pyrrhus were to turn his attentions from Andromaque to Hermione, she would be all sweetness and light and fall at his feet. By contrast, who can say whether the narrator of Proust's work really loves Albertine? He observes that he only wants to be close to her when she is moving away from him. And concludes from this that he does not love her. Then, once she has disappeared, when he hears of her death and is faced with the certainty of a departure with no hope of return, he thinks that he both needed and loved her. But the reader continues to wonder whether, if Albertine were restored to him, as he sometimes dreams is the case, Proust's narrator would still love her. Must we conclude that love is this jealous need, or that there is never love but only jealousy and the feeling of being excluded? These questions do not arise from some probing analysis. It is Proust himself who raises them. This is very important. It is not coming from an analysis or a want to make clear what's happening in the novel, but it is coming from Proust himself. As far as he is concerned, they are constitutive of this thing called love. So the modern heart is intermittent and does not even succeed in knowing itself. In modernity, it is not only works of art that are unfinished. The world they express is like a work which lacks a conclusion. There is no knowing, moreover, whether a conclusion will ever be added. Where human beings are concerned, rather than merely nature, the unfinished quality to knowledge, which is born of the complexity of its objects, is redoubled by a principle of incompletion. For example, one philosopher demonstrated 10 years ago that absolutely objective historical knowledge is inconceivable. Because the act of interpreting the past and placing it in perspective is conditioned by the moral and political choices which the historian has made in his own life, and vice versa. Trapped in this circle, human existence can never abstract from itself in order to gain access to the naked truth. It merely has the capacity to progress towards the objective and does not possess objectivity in fully fledged form. My comment there, that's once more the good old, you cannot see yourself from outside. You are born into this world, and you have always already been here. Leaving the sphere of knowledge for that of life and action, we find modern man coming to grips with ambiguities which are perhaps more striking still. There is no longer a single world in our political vocabulary that has not been used to refer to the most different, even opposed, real situations. Consider freedom, socialism, democracy, reconstruction, Renaissance, and union rights. The most widely divergent of today's largest political parties have all at some time claimed each of these for their own. And this is not a ruse on the part of their leaders. The ruse lies in the things themselves. In one sense, it is true that there is no sympathy for socialism in America, and that is socialism involves or implies radical reform of relations of property ownership. Then there is no chance whatsoever of its being able to settle under the aegis of that country. Rather, subject to certain conditions, it can draw support from the Soviet side. Yet, it is also true that the socio-economic system which operates in the USSR with its extreme social differences and its use of forced labor neither conforms to our understanding of what a socialist regime is, nor could develop of its own accord in order to so conform. Lastly, it is true that a form of socialism which did not seek support from beyond French national borders would be impossible and therefore would lack human meaning. We truly are in what Hegel called a diplomatic situation, or in other words, a situation in which words have at least two different meanings, and things do not allow themselves to be named by a single word. That's a very important point. Things do not allow themselves to be named by a single word. That is stopping the wave. That is where the movement or the aesthetic perception halts. The single word. We are in a world of differences rather than in one single word. Yet, if ambiguity and incompletion are indeed written into the very fabric of our collective existence, rather than just the works of intellectuals, then to seek the restoration of reason would be a derisory response. can and must analyze the ambiguities of our time and strive to plot a course through them which we can follow truthfully and in all conscience. But we know too much about the rationalism of our fathers to simply readopt it wholesale. We know, for example, that liberal regimes should not be taken at their word, that they may well have equality and fraternity as their motto, without this being reflected in their actions. We know that noble ideologies can sometimes be convenient excuses. Moreover, we know that in order to create equality, it is not enough merely to transfer ownership of the means of production to the state. Thus, neither our examination of socialism nor our analysis of liberalism can be free of reservations and limitations. And we should remain in this precarious position for as long as the course of events and human consciousness continue to offer no possibility of moving beyond these two ambiguous systems. To decide the matter from one high by opting for one of the two on the pretext that reason can get the bottom of things would be to show that we care less about reason as it operates, reason in action, rather than the spectre of reason which hides its confusion under a peremptory tone. To love reason as Julien Benda does, to crave the eternal when we are beginning to know ever more about the reality of our time. To want the clearest concept when the thing itself is ambiguous. This is to prefer the word reason to the exercise of reason. To restore is never to re-establish, it is to mask. And I think that is very pertinent here, that we prefer the word reason, the static syllogism, or the formal system of reason, to the action, or as he writes here, exercise of reason, which is verbal, a doing. There is more. We have to wonder whether the image of the classical world with which we are often presented is any more than a legend. Was that world also acquainted with the lack of completion and the ambiguity in which we live? Was it merely content to refuse official recognition to their existence? If so, then far from being evidence of decline, would not the uncertainty of our culture rather be the most acute and honest awareness of something that has always been true, and accordingly something we have gained? When we are told that the classical work is a finished one, we should remind ourselves that Leonardo da Vinci and many others left unfinished works. That Balzac, though there was in fact no way of saying when a work of art has reached the fabled point of maturity, he even went as far as to admit that the artist's labors, which could always continue, are only ever interrupted in order to leave the work with a little clarity. We should also remind ourselves that Cézanne, who thought of his entire oeuvre as an approximation of what he had been looking for, nevertheless leaves us on more than one occasion with a feeling of completion or perfection. Perhaps our feeling that some paintings possess an unsurpassable plenitude is a retrospective illusion. The work is too great a distance from us. It is too different from us to enable us to take hold of it once more and pursue it. Perhaps the painter responsible saw it merely as a first attempt, or indeed as a failure. I spoke a moment ago of the ambiguities inherent in our political situation, as if no past political situation, when in the present, ever bore traces of contradiction or enigma, which might make it comparable with our own. Consider, for example, the French Revolution and even the Russian Revolution in its classical phase until the death of Lenin. So I have to leave the last little bit to the next lecture. You can put a pause there. So we continue as some time to finish off. This greater clarity of vision and this more complete experience of contestation are not the products of a humanity that is debasing itself, but rather of a human race which no longer lives. As it did for a long time on a few archipelagos and promontories. Human life confronts itself from one side of the globe to the other. And speaks to itself in its entirety through books and culture. In the short term, the loss in quality is evident. Yet this cannot be remedied by restoring the narrow humanism of the classical period. The truth of the matter is that the problem we face is how in our time and with our own experience to do what was done in the classical period, just as the problem facing Cézanne was, as he put it, how to make out impressions, something solid and lasting like the art of the museums. And that was the final word of the little booklet by Merleau-Ponty, The World of Perception. And as we went through the pages, it has evoked many associations and, I would say, roots into what has previously gone through this lecture series. I will take up one that was terrifically interesting with identity in a coming lecture, but also the depiction as such. Previous lecture, apparently on a cliff or a naturesque setting. We made a few lectures of Barbara Tversky, and she sees the wondrous, fantastic paintings in the Lascaux cave and others in and around the Pyrenees, how they depict scenes and how they are able to, from the one scene, withdraw, as Cézanne mentioned, a part that represents even more than the whole. For instance, a flock of animals and how they constitute one whole now. But in the depictions, the images so wondrously made by the cavemen, you could see how they detract, they isolate apart, decontextualize, for instance, the horde, and that can later be put in another context, in another relation. She called this process decontextualization and recontextualization. And in this very original action, Merleau-Ponty is pointing towards the history. But here it is absolutely clear that there is in many ways no difference at all between the very act of painting on the cave wall, doing what we call thinking, that is decontextualizing and recontextualizing. Their body is there, their bodies were in the hunting of the horde of buffaloes, if you like. This is more closer to the emblem or the Polysemous image, not the stale idea, if you like, but the drawing action and thinking so close you cannot discern them. The thinking happens in the drawing, and it's a wholeness with the outside and the inside. No longer does it seem that the caveman is a floating intellect in mid-air, not touching the ground. You can compare that to the syllogism coming later, based on linearity. Where two propositions or more make one conclusion. This is more disembodied, if you like, not as in the cave, with the paint, with the flock, with your own doing. And as you can see here, Kalle so generously offered to show his screen. As you can see, the depictions are quite wondrous. Two, possibly buffaloes, bisons, and something that quite clearly looked like a horse. The colors are exquisite. They've been preserved in the darkness of the cave for millennia. And one thing that for me always stuck in my mind, they knew that a horse, when it gallops, has all four legs in the air. So their sense of seeing was acute. It was not until the late 19th century where high-speed photography could prove that fact once more. So for millennia we thought that the horse had at least one hoof or two in the ground. But they could tell the difference, which contradicts what we mean by perception today. I would say that's the broadening of perception. So you can see things that cannot be seen for millennia, needed a high-speed camera to catch the movement. Because Lascaux Cave and the other ones south or north of the border of Pyrenees depict motion in an incredibly forceful way. It is vivid, it is moving on the walls even to this day. So you see, thinking can be movement, and I would say is movement. And it can depict everything, but at the same time take out a part without losing anything of itself, as is something suggested sometimes with the idea in the use of Merleau-Ponty. Maybe a comment from my dear colleague here, Kalle.
It surprised me that Merleau-Ponty, he prefers, when it comes to ambiguity, Rimbaud approached to Racine, as if Racine is not ambiguous, so to say. And Baum was researched Racine is Barthes, and Barthes lifts ambiguities in Racine. And it's interesting that Makilikrist, he says that Baroque is great, and he says that the vortex is the emblematic thing of the Baroque, that is the emblematic thing of the right side of the brain. Usually in art history, for instance in the 19th century, 18th century, Baroque was said it was something inferior to Renaissance. Of course, Makilikrist is not saying that Baroque is better than the Renaissance, but he lifts it up. It has a vortex, it has this non-linear idea that is significant that we need for a healthy brain, so to say. That was my take. And vortex is movement, of course. And we are speaking much about movement in this book. Yesterday we compared Merleau-Ponty to Rolf Pfeiffer, and Rolf Pfeiffer has shown that memory or intelligence is the movement. And today you mentioned Tversky, and what else? Okay, of course Makilikrist and his vortex.
Yeah, also the vortex on the...
Where? Ah yes, this one, of course.
There is a vortex actually depicted on the
Vortex
front cover.
depicted on the cover. Yes, yes. Please, Hans, if you want to say something concluding.
Yes, I don't want to add too much, but speaking of Roland Barthes, actually I was thinking of Roland Barthes a couple of lectures ago and his Empire of Science, because he shows there that the surface and the inside is connected in Japan, where he goes to, where we normally say, one part is an act, unnatural, superficial or synthetical, and the other one is the true thing. And that little booklet, he shows that they don't really discern. It's a bit like the Lavasco cave, or why not a vortex that joins them. The moving part is what takes both what we may be uncalled for called form or technique, or so to speak, not as skilled, and the more creative idea of invention and what should be the essence of art. He shows they go together. The formalities, the pauses, the strictness is together with a looseness and a very fast movement. Yeah, very good with the Baroque too. I do like the Baroque, especially the Baroque music, which I think is today incredibly underappreciated. Thank you for the patience following the whole booklet from side to side, covering the whole 113. This is the first complete readout of a book. And thank you very much for your patience, and have a very pleasant morning. Bye-bye. Thank you.